Okay, we had to start over because we don't know what we're doing. Let's fix that problem. Get some new viewers. Okay. Yeah, did we? Yeah, let's fix our problem, shall we? I was having a terrible feedback thing into my mic. It was absolutely awful. Everything looks a lot better now. So I'll just do some re-announcements to make sure everybody can find us. Okay. Okay. All right. And we're just going to have a good morning and work on some stuff and talk about some stuff and enjoy ourselves. Okay. If I left any of my usual things out, I don't think I have. Okay. Okay. That's six people or so. Hopefully everybody who wants to come will find it. So let's see. Okay. Can I moderate from the? Yes, I can. I can moderate from here. Great. Okay, what else do I need? I've got coffee. I don't need my phone. That can go away. Prayer book. Books to blather about. My cat's looking out the window. Cat's not going to be part of this show, probably. Maybe. Okay. So, let's see. This is the first show. And what I wanted to talk about the first show was what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do is what I've always done, which is I want to approach a number of texts, a number of books in a systematic way to help people learn, whatever it is we're working on. But in this case, we're going to be working on the faith. And the way I want to work on the faith is I want to work on the faith as an intellectual endeavor, because that's my particular inclination and my particular calling. But the way in which I want to work on it as an intellectual endeavor is not in a merely scholarly way, but rather I want to integrate the texts we have on theology and the faith with a regular reading and approach to spiritual theology, so that we don't merely have a dry collection of facts. Usually, when I work on these things, I don't engage myself in a polemical mode, although I'll talk about and I'll complain about things, particularly if I eventually have an audience and we have things we want to talk about and work on. But how do I say this? What's most important to me is to look at things intellectually and to attempt to look at them as a whole, and to look at them in a systematic way as a whole, but also to look at them from within the point of view of a life that's prepared to receive things intellectually and to put the reception of things intellectually to specific lived purposes. Now, and I'm kind of speaking off the cuff here. I know this sounds formal, so it's not necessarily easy to see what I'm trying to talk about. But what I'm trying to talk about is that you can't just pick up a theology book and memorize it, okay? You're not going to just pick up Ott or pick up any of the big theology manuals and start reading them and then take some notes and memorize the notes, and then you got stuff to argue about. That is important, but that doesn't really matter. It's not important to have a bunch of facts memorized if it's from the Bible or if it's from the Catechism or if it's from dogmatic theology. None of that matters if you can integrate it into an intellectual life so as to gain wisdom in the light of the Holy Spirit, so that you might come to better know God, so that God may better be able to put you to his purposes. But to be able to do that means having an understanding of the intellectual life itself. And it also means having an understanding of the intellectual life in terms of the spiritual life of the Catholic. And this requires a lot of preparation that takes a long time and that you've probably never been given. So we're going to work on a lot of different texts over time. So the first text I'll probably end up wanting to work on you with is Tertullian's The Intellectual Life, right there. There's a lot of books I could read just about how to learn things, how to prepare to learn, and I can recommend a lot of different things separately. But what's important about this text is it thinks about the intellectual calling in a systematic way that's integrated with the spiritual life, which is what we want. Also, because we're going to be working on daily reading of the Bible, I've also got an introduction to Lectio Divina by Magrassi. Magrassi is or I believe he's died now, but he was an archbishop and abbot of a Benedictine monastery, and his book is very good. I also want to read the introduction to the newest printing of the Catechism, sort of so that we get a sense of what it is you're supposed to do with catechisms. And also, well, let me talk about sort of the idea for the daily program. So the daily program, or the regular program, probably won't be daily, but I have for a long time wanted to do about 2 to 3 hours of study a day. That process, including my normal religious practices, should start with prayer, then a reading from the Bible with some commentary usually, then a reading from the Catechism, maybe with some commentary. It depends. After that, I'm supposed to have a spiritual reading. So that's usually either going to be a reading from one of the great rules, so like the Rule of St. Benedict or the Rule of St. Augustine, or a reading from one of the spiritual writings in the church, so the Imitation of Christ or St. Dionysius's book. There's others, of course. And then after that, I mean to go properly into some area of study. So we would first work with theology of some sort, and then philosophy, back and forth, and then occasionally some other area, maybe history or some other necessary intellectual area as I deem necessary. And we would probably do this every day on a regular basis. And this is something I've done at my parish from time to time, but being in real life, you know, you only get one person, two people interested in it at a time. They come in and they come out, and it's sort of hard to keep up. And I do a much better job when I'm working with other people consistently. So that's the plan. I don't know how clear that was. Along the way, I sort of want to help you to, as I was talking about before, learn to integrate all these things together so that you can actually learn. So now this show is not conceived of as a study methods show. I'm not sort of teaching you how to cram for the SATs, although some methods that you can get from those kinds of shows and books can be helpful. The real point is to take our time and to work through important and systematic things for the sake of the faith, and specifically for the sake of the faith understood in a spiritual life, and understood in a spiritual life oriented to studying intellectual things. This won't be for everyone, but you know, if it works for you, then you know you should come back and you should work on this with me on a daily basis, and it can really change your life, and it can really change how you think about the faith and approach things. If you're sort of a more hands-on person, this might not be for you, but there's still things for you to learn. I found in working with my parish that most Catholics don't really know anything about spiritual theology. They kind of end up knowing third-hand facts derived from spiritual theology that they can't actually put in practice. I was surprised how many traditional Catholics don't understand mental prayer at all, or how many even traditional Catholics pray the rosary but don't understand that the rosary is a device for mental prayer. They sort of get stuck in verbal prayer forever. I didn't realize how few people understand, especially mental discipline. Most people understand physical austerity, but even that considered, most of them don't know how to use it to really advance in the spiritual life or where they're going. And that's kind of really a Catholic spiritual 101 thing. I mean, you know, it's the spiritual life isn't about sort of just a you know, random set of devotions or prayers that you say on a regular basis, although that can be helpful. It's really about understanding the life you're trying to live, infused with grace by the Holy Spirit, so that you can come closer and closer to intimacy with God. And this life has certain stages and certain steps and looks a certain way. And in achieving this life, one can approach different kinds of work in a more and more divinized and perfect manner. So on one level, I sort of endeavor to teach you the fundamentals of the spiritual life, and then aim the spiritual life at a spiritualized intellectual life, so that you know you can better study. But again, as I said, that might not be everybody's calling, and so I don't expect this to be for everyone. But it will help those of you who are interested in anything having to do with the intellect and reason and knowledge. You know, given the audience I come out of, I expect that to be a lot of people. Let me think, what else? What didn't I cover? Okay, again, so the daily program, in any case, and I don't know how to divide this up into videos. I don't know if this should end up being 5 videos a day. I don't know if this should end up being one long, you know, 1 to 3 or 4 hour video a day. I don't know. you guys can help me out as we go along. But the daily program is supposed to be this again: prayer. Usually I have a study prayer, or I might do some of the stuff I do in chant every day, or whatever. I'm not sure how I want to do that, but I usually at least have a study prayer that I say when in group. And then reading from the Bible, usually with commentary, reading from the Catechism, and kitty cat, usually with commentary. Then reading from sort of a spiritual work, and that'll probably alternate between some rule, so the rule of Saint Benedict, the rule of Saint Augustine, or reading from some spiritual work of importance. So I have various introductions to spiritual theology, but we also have the Imitation of Christ, or something like that. Then a reading from the Lives of the Saints, and I've got a set of those available, mostly spiritual masters, and some others, Thomas Aquinas, St. Dominic, intellectual saints, some modern saints on the list, especially John Paul II. I also have George Pell's prison journals on the list. He's not a saint because he hasn't died, but he has achieved in his life a very unique circumstance that I think is important for understanding the spiritual situation we're in right now. And I'll have to review his prison journals, but from his interviews, I think that they'll be what I'm looking for. And then the next section after that will be some kind of theology proper. And there's a lot of ways to divide theology, but I'll usually sort of try to be somewhat systematic. So we'll probably start with a text in fundamental theology. And I'll show you some, probably tomorrow. I don't want to do it today, but I'll show you some ways of arranging theology and how to proceed. I might also jump around a little bit, depending on audience demand. One thing I wanted to really work on for myself was liturgical theology, because of trad things, and I'm very tired of trad stuff, but it's the biggest source of polemical problems. Because of trad things, we keep getting into disputes about the liturgy, and it's pretty clear that nobody's studying liturgical theology at all, and that traditionalists are just making stuff up or cobbling stuff together. And that's not intellectually acceptable. And on top of the fact that it's not intellectually acceptable, it's spiritually acceptable, because, I mean, it's pretty clear that Sacrosanctum Concilium is the Declaration on the Liturgy in Vatican II, Sacrosanctum Concilium. It's the first major systematic text in the magisterium on the liturgy. As far as I can tell, it has had no general public reception at all, whatsoever. Certainly not amongst traditionalists, who tend to think that, the liturgy is, I don't know, whatever purpose you want to put it to in your polemics, but also strangely among non-traditionalists, where the liturgy is received as somewhere in between sort of a site of some kind of emotional happening, or is received as some kind of obligation that one goes through, some, it's almost as a penitential or prayer exercise. And neither of these tendencies that you see floating around are very good. And it's pretty clear that nobody can talk about liturgy systematically at all. So, I mean, there's a lot of contemporary texts on liturgical theology that simply haven't been received in this community and really need to be. It's actually very confusing. Of course, lots of talk, Mass is beautiful, blah, blah, blah. There's prayers you can bring, but that's not what is it? What are we doing in the liturgy? What's it for? How's it structured? Why is it structured that way? What is it about? And I don't know anybody. I don't know one man in 100 that can give me a systematic account of that, even among people obsessed and angry about the liturgy. So that's a real issue. And that's a topic I wanted to work on. So that might skip between fundamental theology and that. And then one more, because you don't want to spend all week on one topic, because that's hard on the mind. So we can figure out where we want to go probably tomorrow or the next day. It depends. We need to get through one book. And then after theology, I would do philosophy. There'd be two major divisions in how I teach philosophy. So there would be a synthetic section and an analytic section. The synthetic section, synthetic just has to do with it being in a whole. So in the synthetic section, I'll usually have a complete text of some sort that sort of forms a cohesive whole and addresses things in a broad way. So for example, say a Platonic dialogue, or sort of one of the great philosophical monographs, usually primary sources, usually old, although there's occasionally contemporary good philosophical monographs. But I could use other things. I haven't decided the full range of texts possible here, but I know I have, for instance, the Platonic dialogues in consideration. And in the synthetic section, you sort of read the text and you go over it and you think about it. We would talk about it. And then the analytic section is still texts again, but in the analytic section, you're treating things topically. So say if in the synthetic section, I would read a Platonic dialogue, and then we'd do an analytic section, and we'd start one of the subdivisions of that, and we'd start with, say, a book on logic. So we might be reading the Meno or the Republic or something, and then a book on logic. And you go back and forth that way, alternating days or in different kinds of time periods. And these two approaches synthesize. So, as you read logic, you start to see how arguments in the synthetic section are put together, and it enhances your approach. So we go through as you learn logic, you learn you learn philosophy of nature, and you learn metaphysics, and you learn philosophical anthropology, and you learn natural theology, and you learn ethics, and you learn political philosophy of science, things like that. And in all of these, you start with very basic texts, and then we sort of move you to more and more advanced ones. And that's usually how I approach things. And then we might have one more section, just depends on the day, where we do something else. I have some books on physics, but they're sort of worked up from a Thomistic perspective we can work through. We can work on, eventually, if the audience gets very good at these things and is really thinking things through, we can work on public papers and intellectual things. You start to engage with other material. But the basic idea is reading texts, working on them, thinking about them together, going through them on a regular basis. It's to be a near daily study period. And then maybe once or twice a week, I might do a presentation or a video or a summary of some of the things we went over that I found to be very important. And all of this is presupposing engagement with the chat audience. I really like to have a chat going that can tell me things that it wants to talk about and ask questions about things we've been going over, so that we can, together get to where we need to go. I don't just like to read and then maybe say a few remarks just that are off the top of my own head. I like to work with people collaboratively, as in person as possible. I think that's more or less all I need to do for a kind of propedeutic to where we're going, and I don't know if anybody's kept up with any of that. But if anybody wanted to ask any questions before I sort of move on, to what I actually want to do today, go ahead. Let's see where the live chat is, by the way. Okay. Let's see what we got. One review. Balthazar. Middle prayer. Okay. So a while ago, and I don't have Michael's thing where I can pop it on the bottom of the screen, so you're just going to have to deal with me reading it. So Luminar 19 asks, for viewers and myself, what would be good material for someone brand new who is Catholic to philosophy and theology? Okay, so I didn't want to spend much time today on, the full range of texts that you can use. First of all, but that said, first of all, Bible, catechism. The end. Get the Bible, open it up, read all of it at least one time in your life, from beginning to end. No exceptions. I don't care how boring Chronicles and Numbers is. You have to go through all of it. You don't have any real intellectual excuse on that. You shouldn't be reading systematic big theology texts or even summaries of systematic theology in any kind of, real authoritative way without at least constantly engaging with Scripture, if not having read all of it already. That's just, 101 here. And same thing with the catechism. Pick the catechism up, open it, read it all, cover to cover. Then that's the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Not the Baltimore Catechism, not the Penny Catechism, not, Pius X Catechism, not the Roman Catechism. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I mean the contemporary big Catechism of the Catholic Church. I forget what they call it. They have a question and answer format version that was Benedict put out, and it's fine. I forget the name of it all of a sudden. It'll come to me later. It doesn't matter because I'm going to tell you that it's fine, but that's not really what you want. You really want the full one, because why? Well, one of the things you're going to learn when we work on fundamental theology is you're going to learn stuff about magisterial theology. And one of the important things about magisterial theology and teaching and being taught, which is a part of the spiritual life, being taught by the church is something that a man is obliged to do in the Spirit. And one of the things, one of the aspects of being taught is sort of receiving the teaching. And from where do you receive the teaching? Well, you receive the teaching from the teacher. And who is the teacher? Well, the proximate teacher, the proximate magister, the proximate master to us right now is the contemporary church and what the contemporary church teaches. It's the proximate magisterium. So the magister, the master, has a teaching, a magisterium. And there's a proximate magisterium. That is to say, how he's teaching right now. If you want to think about this in terms of the ministry of Christ, it's not as if, when Christ is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, that the parable of the prodigal son is not also part of the teaching. But when he's teaching you the Sermon on the Mount, That's what he's teaching you. That's the proximate magisterium. That's the thing he's focusing on right now, and that's the way he's articulating the gospel right now. And so you're to receive that as what the Lord, what the Master is giving you right now to work on. And the church is giving us right now, as the proximate input into theology, first of all, the catechism. Okay, so Bible and catechism, revelation, and the teaching of the church in their most immediate form. Then after that, if you want to proceed on, there's magisterial documents, and there's sort of basic introductions to various areas of theology that we can go through sort of as we get there. But I don't want to hear anybody talking to me about sort of more advanced stuff and, I want to solve this dispute we're having with Jay Dyer and, this dispute I'm having about the 15th secret of Fatima or whatever before you've read your Bible and before you've read your catechism. I'll help you to read some other things while we read the Bible and the catechism. But if you're not reading those, you don't need to be moving on to debate with Joe Schmo about all this nonsense. So, Bible, proximate magisterium, and then I'll help you with some introductions as we go along. Okay. Now, if you want some indications, Ott's little book on dogmatic theology, its name escapes me right now, but it's very famous. Just Ott, O-T-T, very famous. I can't remember all this stuff. It'll come to me later, but it's just a dogmatic theology little book. It's perfectly fine as an introduction to dogmatic theology or as an index. If you wanted to get one of the big sets that are in English, I usually use, for theology manuals, I usually use the Sacra Theologia Summa. There's also a new one out, a new dogmatic theology text out by an Italian called Truth is a Synthesis. It's very good and has very contemporary magisterial theological awareness in it, and I like it, and I'll be using it for various purposes as we go forward. But you'd want to start with something like that if you're going to get into it, and then you go into sort of deeper texts. If you want a sort of more accessible introduction into Catholic theology, Thomas Joseph White has an introduction to Catholicism. Let me pull that up. Thomas Joseph White, The Light of Christ, An Introduction to Catholicism. That's going to be a pretty good first step, although it's a little particular, but it's down the alley of what I'm interested in and the sort of thing I'm going to, tell you about, and that's fine. But I wouldn't consider it. It's not sufficient for anything. Ought is sufficient for some things systematically. Thomas Joseph White is giving you a very particular take. It's a fine take, but a very particular take and approach on a lot of things, and in a thoroughgoing introductory way. And so, if you're the guy who wants the firm, big answers all ready to go, or at least an outline, I'm not going to give you Thomas Joseph White and say, okay, then go forth and argue with people, although you shouldn't really be doing that anyway. With respective introductions to philosophy, that gets a little more difficult. I'm going to give you, when we get there, I'll probably have 2 or 3 or 4 different introductory texts I try to work on. I'll probably use Kreeft's Summa Philosophica, I believe it's called. I haven't used it before for this purpose, but I looked it over the other day and it was good, and it covered more things than most of the other introductory texts I've used. Um, who else is there? Um, Ed Fazer's The Last Superstition actually ends up being a pretty decent introduction to philosophy, although sort of it's polemical and apologetic because it's meant to do away with the kind of atheism you find in somebody like Richard Dawkins. But it's good, and you can learn a lot of the basics of philosophy you might not have learned. And if you like to learn things like that for a particular purpose, that's one of the better ones I know for Catholics. But I wouldn't say that it's adequate. Um, what else is there? There's an Elements of Philosophy book that's fine, but I don't remember the full name on it, and it's kind of hard to see. It's not very digestible, but it has everything. I don't remember. I'd have to pull it up. And what else is there off the top of my head? Couple of them. Oh, Ed Fazer's Aquinas text is fairly okay as an introduction. We're talking about introductions. Let me see. And then what else? Haley asked if I'm interested in Balthazar. Yeah, but that's way down the road. We won't get there for a while unless we have a need. Luminor says a stream on mental prayer would be good. Yeah, no, it would absolutely be good, and it's necessary because nobody knows what they're doing at all. And it makes you pray to a lot of things. Like most Catholic accounts of prayer are somewhere in between different variations on verbal prayer. You do this devotion, say these things on this day, and that's okay. That's fine. Or superstition. Really, like honestly, like lots of just casual advice about prayer is superstitious. If you say this way, this is going to happen. No, that's not what it's about. Verbal prayer is supposed to lead to, on the natural side, is supposed to lead to mental prayer. That is to say, a kind of mental engagement with God, a mental talking to God, a mental thinking about God. Ultimately a kind of mental looking at God, and also an affective prayer, which is to say, a situation wherein the heart, the will, is moved towards God and in a kind of relationship with God, in a way that can be understood personally, but can also be understood, in the way that an intellectual might understand the movement of his heart, but that's sort of complicated. But I mean, these things happen naturally as you sort of engage yourself in a serious way with mental prayer. And then, of course, you receive grace, and this grace allows you deeper and deeper levels of union with God, with the assistance of God. That's the point of devotions and prayer. It's not, say these things this way and this will happen. That's not the point. Let's see, what else? The book by Ott. Thanks, Kyle. The book by Ott is Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma. I had forgotten for some reason. Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked my background. I don't have a PhD or anything, but I went to college. Ultimately, I did work in philosophy, and I did work in political science, specifically in political theory. I wanted to be a professor for a period of time, and then I learned that the university is Sodom and Gomorrah, and I don't want to do it. And it's not just that it's Sodom and Gomorrah. It's also that I mean, it's awful. It's like the life of an academic, unless you're famous or have got some kind of lucky break. You're it's like office work, except for intellectuals, and it's tedious and terrible for most professors. Like even if so, first of all, I was not going to be going to any big deal school, but so that's even worse. But even if you go to like Harvard or Yale or any of the other big name schools and get a PhD and go forward in it, you're still spending all your time sort of desperately trying to crank out academic material so that you have a bunch of credentials on a resume so that you might be able to, after a certain number of years or decades, get a position in a department where maybe you'll get tenure after a certain period of time, so that maybe you'll eventually be able to take on a class load where maybe you can do meaningful research, so that maybe you can finally enjoy an actually fulfilling intellectual life and an actually fulfilling teaching career, or research career with fellow researchers and students. So you're talking like an intellectual formation period that goes. Some people aren't even ready to go until their late 20s or 30 years old, and then you got to go try to get ahead, and so you work on that for another 10, 15, 20 years, and then by the time you're 45 or 50, if you did everything right, maybe you get a good position where it's not terrible, um, and then you try to go ahead. And I said, no, I don't want to do it. And so I sort of just have done private intellectual work. My training was primarily philosophical, and it was rigorous at the time because I was trying to go forward. And when I did philosophy, I approached it primarily from phenomenology and from a history of philosophy perspective. So, methodologically, I primarily read uh, in the phenomenological tradition, and then I also read, primary texts in the history of philosophy and tried to sort of think about how people in the past thought about the philosophical project, especially Plato, some of the other Greeks, but Plato in particular, and also the German tradition. I was broadly aware of most of German idealism, most of German phenomenology, and I had especially worked on Nietzsche. I could have I could have done actually pretty serious scholarly work on Nietzsche and Hegel. I did a lot of work on Hegel, and Heidegger. Were sort of three big big philosophers I did a lot of work on in my historical work. Um, oh, I mean, some political philosophy stuff related to that, tied into political theory. I did a lot of work reading. I read a lot of Leo Strauss. Um, there's some other German thinkers from time to time. Uh, some some Marxist thinkers, some Oakeshott, middle of the road thinkers. Um, but that's neither here nor there. I did not have much of a religious formation, a little bit, at least intellectually. I did have a religious background. I went to Christian school when I grew up, but it was not intellectually rigorous at all. And but sort of that's the long, the short of my actual, professional formation. After college, and to a certain extent with it, I started to do a lot of side work. And then as I was growing into my engagement with Catholicism and my conversion, I did a lot of self-reading. I would say that I sort of read myself into the faith by way of Thomas, by way of a deeper engagement with Plato on religion, by way of Nietzsche indirectly, by way of various Catholic thinkers, by way of Ed Feser, especially Ed Feser sort of went ahead and clicked nuts and bolts into place for me where I had been too loose and diffused by a certain amount of engagement with the monastic tradition. But I've been very, very broadly read in a lot of those things. If you want to know my background, but if you were asking whether how many degrees I have, that's not how I got here. I got here by just doing the work. Let's see. Somebody asked if I was still into phenomenology. Yes, and in fact, if we go far enough in this, I'll just probably teach you phenomenology. Let's see. Mike Schmitz's Bible in a year. Yeah. Oh, by the way, yeah, that reminds me. I'm doing a Bible and Catechism in a year cycle. I'll see how Schmitz is doing it. I don't want there to be a lot of overlap. We got the other guy on, his name escapes me, but because he has all those, the guy that does all the bird stuff on Discord, and he also does videos. If your name is not the same thing as on Reason and Theology, I'm not going to put it together. I'm terrible with names. But that guy, he does. He does a lot of Catholicism from the Bible, Catholicism from the Old Testament, and he's about to do a cycle of reading as well. And so I want to make sure there's not a lot of overlap with that series, and there's not a lot of overlap with Schmitz. So my guess is I'll probably try to do. It's with the Catechism, so that helps, and then I'll try to do some running commentary, probably from either Thomas Aquinas or from Brant Petrie on the scriptures, and so that way I'll keep pretty distinct from both things. Let's see. What else? Yeah, the Francis revision. That's what the church is teaching. Not much has changed in the revision, and the only thing anybody knows about is the death penalty revision. But yeah, that's the Francis revision. That's the proximate magisterium. I have very particular opinions about what the change to the teaching on the death penalty amounts to in moral theology. And we might go over it at some point, but it doesn't really make a lot of practical difference to anyone, and I don't concern myself much with it in terms of its value. Somebody asked if I'm familiar with Chesterton. I'll get myself in trouble. I'm familiar with Chesterton. He's okay. Chesterton says a lot of clever things. I might actually, though, read his book on Aquinas for us because it comes very highly recommended. But I've never been a big fan of Chesterton. I don't dislike Chesterton. He's got a very particular style and approach that I've never found that entertaining. Let's see. Anyway, okay, how long have we gone? God, 40. You got me to talk for 48 minutes. Okay, so let's see. What can we do? So I wanted to do at least a little bit in Sertoliange, the intellectual life. I don't know how much we ought to do today. maybe just the front matter, and then we can start working on it more seriously tomorrow. So my goal for the first week is to read Sertion's The Intellectual Life, Its Spirit, Conditions, and Methods this week. That's my first goal. It'll take about 9 hours. We would work on it and I'll talk about it. And if if you're paying attention, you can engage with it as we go along and ask questions when I break. But I mean, we'll see how the chat does that. So let me explain how I proceed. So, and when you do this kind of work, there's the long part and the short part. Most of the time, if you see anybody do any intellectual work on YouTube, it's always the short part. The short part is the fun part. It's the part where you present your findings, where you present all the conclusions and you summarize them in a neat bow for everybody so that they can go, oh, wow, I didn't know that. The long part's the doing of it. So it's the reading and the engagement and the thinking. That's what I care about. And that's what I want to bring to people. But that's hours at a time. This book alone will take from 9 hours, 7 to 9 hours. We'll see. If you go through it with me and you work on it, you can listen to it and engage with it. And if you do it in the live stream with me, you can ask the questions in the chat. If you, want to look at the video later, after we finished, after I've done, or at a later time down the week, you can bring it to the next live stream, put it in the chat, or you can put it in the comments. And I will diligently look for questions either in the comments or in the live chat the next day or wherever, and do my best to get to those as soon as I see them, in one of the videos. And so that way we can keep a continual sort of community dialogue going about whatever it is we're reading. Because it's absolutely important that when we're reading anything and when you're listening to me read anything, that you start to think about it, you start to work it up in your mind, and you ask yourself questions about it and start to apply it in your mind. What'll happen is I'll tell you, so it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's the Bible. It doesn't matter if it's a book about Lectio Divina. It doesn't matter if it's a life of the saint. You need to be actively engaging the mind with what I'm saying when I read the text. You need to, I don't care right now how you do it. And it's hard with, if I'm reading one of the lives of the saints, you can use your imagination and you can picture a scene and you can picture what the saint does and, how it interacts, in a kind of movie-like narrative. And that'll help you engage. And, you need to begin to ask yourself questions about what it is you're looking at. If it's not something that lends itself to, cinema-style imagination, you need to have a sort of running chain of thought that you're creating in your mind as I go forward through a text. And so the best way to do that is sort of keep a thought going forward and put stuff together as I read. And then at the end, either ask yourself or me or the chat questions. And, if you're not here for the live stream, to do it when you look at it at work or, when you go to bed or whatever. And then bring it the next day or when you can get it, put in the comments. But you need to be working. You won't get much out of this just listening to me. Now, there's other, if you just want to listen to, I have a pleasant voice and when I read, and if you just want to listen to me and go to bed or something, or, eat lunch or whatever, that's fine. But in terms of helping the intellectual life come along, you're not going to get a lot. Okay. I don't think there's anything else. Oh, let me see. Somebody asked if I read the Catechism Commentary by Father Hardon. I have it. I haven't read it yet. I've got RCIA I have to teach next year again, and I bought all of Hardon's books because one of my fellow catechists is a Marian catechist, so Being a Marian catechist just means being a James Hardin catechist. And so I thought I'd go ahead and buy all the materials so that I could, work with him, in a more communicative style. And so I have that commentary, but I have not read it yet. It's sitting in my library. Okay. If there's no other questions or no other thoughts right now, I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we're going to start Sertillange's The Intellectual Life, and I'll probably just read the front matter. So it's going to be, let's see, it's going to be the forward, the preface, and the author's forward. And then maybe we'll stop there. It'll just depend on how much time has passed. I think that'll be good for today. That's a good first day. And then sort of, you get used to how I operate. Let's see now. Okay, let me get the usual prayer. With prayers, with set prayers, I usually alternate Latin and English on a daily basis. Since it's the first day and you should know the content of the prayer, we will do it in English because I don't believe you know Latin. I just don't believe you. So we'll start now. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Ineffable Creator, who from the treasures of your wisdom have established 3 hierarchies of angels, have arrayed them in marvelous orders above the fiery heavens, and have marshaled the regions of the universe with such artful skill. You are proclaimed, the true font of light and wisdom, and the primal origin raised high beyond all things. Pour forth a ray of your brightness into the darkened places of my mind. Disperse from my soul the twofold darkness into which I was born, sin and ignorance. You make eloquent the tongues of infants. Refine my speech and pour forth upon my lips the goodness of your blessing. Grant to me keenness of mind, capacity to remember, skill in learning, subtlety to interpret, and eloquence in speech. May you guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. You who are true God and true man, who live and reign, world without end. Amen. Some brief remarks on the prayer. So this is Aquinas' prayer before study. You should notice that in the structure of the prayer, of course, we address God, and the first thing we do when we address God is we address God in his structure, in his character, as what he is, understood in his exalted character. So we evoke his wisdom, and we evoke the works of his wisdom. Why? Because in study we're attempting to relate ourselves to the divine wisdom. And in relating ourselves to the divine wisdom, we attempt to evoke what it is in coming to talk to the Creator. Then we proclaim him what? The true font of light and wisdom. Why? Because we want access to this light and wisdom. That's what we're asking him for. We're praying and asking God for help to come to wisdom. And what do we say? We tell him to pour forth a ray of that brightness into our minds. And what do we ask it to do? We ask it to disperse from the soul ignorance and sin. Why? Because these block learning. They block wisdom. We also then say, you make eloquent the tongues of infants. Why? Because we're evoking another power he has. And we ask him to refine our speech. Well, at least in my case, I'm certainly asking that why, so that I can teach you, so that I can speak out to you, so that I can orate to you. But also, of course, subsequent to the study, when you attain wisdom, when you attain knowledge, you don't obtain the knowledge for yourself, but you attain the knowledge in order that you, or at least not merely for yourself, you attain the knowledge that you can speak and proclaim, so that you can speak and proclaim God and Christ, not only to yourself, but to others. And for that, you need eloquence. And then we then ask God for the various needs of study, the specific needs of study. And we ask Him to grant us keenness of mind. We can get it. Capacity to remember so that we can retain what we see. Skill in learning. So that's sort of about arrangement and, about integration. Subtlety to interpret. That's nuance. That is to be able to see the depths of what it is we're looking at and not merely to look at them superficially. And eloquence in speech again. And then may you what? Guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to completion. Why? Because the act of study is a full act with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we want these things that we're asking of God to be part of a full and complex act. And then we conclude, of course, in the God who is true God and true man, who lives and reigns a world without end. So again, we evoke His sovereignty. Why? And His personality. Why? Because He's the sort of thing that's concerned. He's the sort of thing that knows. He's the sort of thing that we can relate what we've asked to our lives. And He's also sovereign and powerful, and He can make our requests we've given Him be the case. He's the Lord of all of the things we're asking. That's the point of this prayer. And we will say it every day. Every day I do this work, I say this prayer, and we will say it every day, and that's what we're asking for. Okay. All right. So let's see. I'm going to do. I can read it. I'm going to read it from the book, from the text in hand. I also have it on PDF. I don't know. So usually, if I've done readings online with people, I've usually done it in Discord or somewhere else where there's no video. This is the first time I'm doing it with video. So I don't know how my audience is engaging with the video at all. So obviously, if I'm reading from a book with a webcam here, you're just going to see me like this while I read. And that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But I don't know how that suits the audience. My other option is to read it from the screen, which is tiring on my eyes, but sort of it's more as if I'm looking at you and looking at the camera. So, as we go forward in this process, sort of what works best. I don't know if you all are going to end up looking at the video or if you're going to end up listening and not even looking at the video at all. But, sort of just let me know. Also, it's also possible if I do it from the screen that I can put it on the screen. I have it queued up to do that. But that presents its own challenges. And I don't know how many people want to watch the text scroll by as I read it out loud on YouTube. That seems weird. I would never do that if I was listening to somebody read. But some people might want to do that, so I don't know. So as we go forward, so just let me know what you want to do. Okay. Now, of course, we'll start with the title page. The Intellectual Life, Its Spirit, Conditions, and Method by A.G. Sertillange. Translated from the French by Mary Ryan with a new foreword by James V. Shull, Society of Jesus, Catholic University of America Press, Washington, D.C. The original imprimatur on it was 1946, although I believe the book is older. I think it's from the 30s. I normally read the table of contents, but since this is not a systematic work, I'll skip it. It is a systematic work, but not in a way that you reading the table of contents at this time in your reading career will help you. Forward. On the joys and travails of thinking. A vocation is not fulfilled by vague reading and a few scattered writings. A.D. Sertillanges, preface to the 1934 edition. Many of us in later years wish that when we were younger, someone would have told us about certain things, often certain books that, as we look back on them, would have greatly helped us in the project of our lives. In particular, would have helped us know the truth of things. Some of these books are directed to what is true, to reality, to what is, but a certain number are rather directed to the question of how do I go about knowing. I have in fact written one myself, Another Sort of Learning, Ignatius Press, 1988. In that book, I mention A.D. Sertillanges' book On the Intellectual Life among those few that will give anyone seriously interested a good start. But Sertillanges gives more than a good start. He explicitly tells us how to start, how to read and write, how to discipline our time, indeed our soul. He also attends to the life of the spirit in which any true intellectual life exists. We have perhaps heard from Aristotle that we are rational animals, that the contemplative life is something to which we should aspire. Practically no one tells us what this might mean, whether it is something that is available to us on some condition that we do not easily comprehend. But even if we vaguely know that the intellectual life is an exalted one, we have heard rather less about what acquiring this life might entail. No one spells out its terms and conditions. We are also aware that wisdom comes rather later in life than we might have suspected, yet we suspect that there were ways that could have helped us had we only known them. The great French Dominican A.D. Sertillanges lived 1863 to 1948 and wrote a book in 1921 which he called La Vie Intellectuelle. The book was immediately a success, went through many editions and in many languages. Recently, I recommended this book to a young military officer in graduate school at Indiana University, a man destined to teach at West Point. He told me that he ordered it from the Catholic University of America Press, but that at the time it was out of print. I had occasion to write to the marketing director at Catholic University of America Press. I mentioned that this book needed to be kept in print, and much to her credit, she told me that indeed CUA Press was considering another printing. Too, I remarked that the book probably needed a new introduction. I was worried that computer users, a group that now probably included most of us, might be put off when they read Sertillanges' advice to take notes on file cards. Even though I recognize that without my help, any computer user will easily translate Sertillanges' advice into computer practicality, I was concerned lest people think this timeless book was out of date because it was written before the computer was a normal tool. In any case, lo, the good director at CUA Press wondered if I would like to write one. Indeed, I would. In a sense, this brief foreword is simply my statement about why this wonderful, useful book should always be kept in print and why it should always be sought out by younger undergraduate and graduate students, by elderly folks, and by anyone in between. Every time I have used this book in a class, often when I teach a St. Thomas course, I have had undergraduate students tell me later that they thought it was a book they remembered because it taught them much about how to continue their intellectual curiosity in a practical, effective manner, not merely in college, but throughout their lives. At first sight, as I intimated, this is a quaint book. At second sight, it is an utterly demanding book. Sertillanges painstakingly tells us how to take notes, how to begin to write and to publish, how to organize our notes, and behind them are thoughts. Thus I use the word quaint because we no longer use, as Sertillanges did, pens and early typewriters, but sophisticated computers and printing processors that would have amazed him. But keep in mind that Thomas Aquinas, about whom Sertillanges wrote so well and from whose inspiration this book derives, had perhaps only 25 years of productive activity in the 13th century. He had none of the mechanisms that even Sertillanges had in the 20s of the 20th century, yet Aquinas produced an amount of brilliant and profound matter that is simply astounding. How did Aquinas ever do it? It is highly doubtful that he would have written more or better if he had the latest computer at his disposal. In fact, in some sense, it may have been a hindrance, for St. Thomas developed a great memory and an uncanny capacity to have at his fingertips all the knowledge of the great writers before him, including Scripture. This wisdom took books and reading, of course, even for St. Thomas, but he learned how to do these things. What Sertillanges teaches us is how, in our own way, to imitate the lesson that we can find in the great medieval Dominican about how to lead a proper intellectual life, one suffused with honesty and prayer, with diligent work, and, in the end, with the delight of knowing. In reading Sertillanges' book, we cannot help feeling that he is letting us on to some of the secrets of what went into Aquinas' vast productivity and insight. There are just so many hours of the day in a week or a month. Sertillanges does not ask us all to give up our daily lives and devote ourselves full time to the intellectual life in the sense that a St. Thomas did. Rather, in his practical way, Sertillanges teaches us how to organize our lives so that we can acquire a solid beginning, hopefully when we are young, and spend the rest of our days building on this solid foundation. In brief, Sertillanges teaches us about habits, about discipline, about, yes, productivity and truth. He thinks that we can lead a true intellectual life if we manage to keep 1 or 2 hours a day for serious pursuit of higher things. He's not rigid or impractical here. Moreover, when stated in terms of hours or time, we tend to miss what Sertillanges is driving at. Any sort of learning in the beginning will have drudgery connected with it. We could simply call it a kind of work. We need to come to a point where we begin to delight in what we are knowing, where we cannot wait to get back to our considerations or writings or thoughts on a given topic. Anything that is fascinating. Chesterton, whose own intellectual life seems as vibrant as anyone's in our time, once remarked that there are no such things as uninteresting subjects, only uninteresting people. A large part of this so-called uninterestedness is precisely because we have never learned how or why to see what is there. Sertillanges teaches us to examine our lives. He does not neglect to mention that moral faults, both serious ones and light ones, can in fact hinder us from having the freedom from ourselves that enables us to see what is not ourselves, to see what is. Do you want to have an intellectual life? Sertillanges asks in his own introduction to his 1934 edition. Begin by creating within you a zone of silence. We live in a world surrounded by noise, by a kind of unrest that fills our days and nights. We have so many things to distract us, even if sometimes we think they might educate us. Sertillanges is sure, Sertillanges is sure we have the time, but he is also sure that we do not notice that we have the time because our lives appear to be busy and full. We find the time first by becoming interested, by longing to know. Sertillanges demands an examination of conscience, both about our sins and about our use of our time. An intellectual life, a contemplative life, is itself filled with activity, but activity is purposeful, that wants to know, and to know the truth. What we often call so-called intellectuals today are probably not exactly what Sertillanges had in mind when he talked about the so-called intellectual life. Intellectuals as a class, as Paul Johnson wrote in his book, The Intellectuals, may well be evolving theories and explanations precisely as a product of their own internal moral disorders. We should never forget that an intellectual life can be a dangerous life. The greatest of vices stem not from the flesh, but from the spirit, as Augustine said. The brightest of the angels was the fallen angel. These sober considerations explain the reasons why I like this little book of Sertillanges. He does not hesitate to warn us of the intimate relation between our knowing the truth and our not ordering our souls to the good. The intellectual life can be, and often is, a perilous life, but this is no reason to deny its glory. And Sertillanges is very careful to direct us to those things that we pursue, because they explain what we are and explain the world and God to us. When we pick up this book, we will be surprised, no doubt, by its detailed practicality. In one sense, this is a handbook, a step-by-step direction of what to do first, what next. We are tempted to thinking that the intellectual life is some gigantic insight that comes to us one fine morning while we are shaving or making breakfast. Sertillanges does not deny that some insight can come this way, but the normal course of things will require a habitual concern to pursue the truth, to know, to be curious about reality. This book, moreover, is not primarily for academic professionals, though it will harm not a single one of them, nor would I call it for everyone, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, but it is for very many, and not always just for those who have higher degrees in physics or metaphysics. This is a book that allows us to be free and independent, to know why we need not be dependent on the media or ideology that often dominate our scene. It is a book that does not exactly so-called teach us to know, but it teaches us how to go about knowing and how to continue knowing. The book is designed to keep us inwardly alive, precisely by teaching us how to know and grow in knowing, steadily, patiently, yes, critically. I would put the intellectual life on the desk of every serious student and most of the unserious ones. Indeed, Plato said that our very lives are so-called unserious in comparison to that of God. Something of that relaxed leisure, of that sense of freedom that comes from knowing and wanting to know is instilled in our souls by this book. Its very possession on our desk or shelves is a constant prod, a visible reminder to us that the intellectual life is not something alien, not something that we have no chance in our own way to learn about. We should read through this classic book, make its teachings ours after our own manner, adapting what Sertillanges suggests to our own computer, to our own books, to our own hours of the day or night should be no problem. This book will have an abiding, concrete effect on our lives. If we follow its outlines, it will make us alive about that inner, curious, delightful way that is connoted by the words in this book's magnificent title, The Intellectual Life. I see no reason for settling for anything less. The great French Dominican still teaches us how to learn, but only if we are free enough to let him teach us. James V. Shaw, Society of Jesus, Georgetown University, Ash Wednesday, 1998. Okay, that's the first section. Okay, let's see. All right. If anybody wanted to ask any questions, by the way, now would be the time to do it. Okay. I'm not getting that phone. Anyway. By the way, since it's the morning and you're studying, always have some coffee. Now, this is terrible McDonald's iced coffee with vanilla in it, but it's $1. Have something. You can get as fancy as you want. Don't give Starbucks money, but you can get fancy on your own. But have coffee. Okay. Let's see, is the translator's note of any use? No. And the translator just wants to pontificate about the art of translation for a page, so we'll skip that. Let's see, we have a preface by the author and a foreword. It's very short by the author. Okay. Preface. The little work now republished has been reprinted many times. It dates from 1920. I had not reread it, and I wondered whether, looking at the book with a fresh eye and 15 added years' experience, I should recognize my thought. I find it again, whole and entire, except for shades of difference, which I shall not fail to bear in my mind in the revision that I am now undertaking. The reason is that, in reality, these pages have no date. They come from what is deepest in me. I had had them in my mind for a quarter of a century when they saw the light of day. I wrote them as one expresses one's essential convictions and pours out one's heart. What makes me trust that they have struck home is assuredly their wide diffusion, but still more, the testimony of innumerable letters, some thanking me for the technical help I gave to intellectual workers, others for the ardor that they said had been aroused in young or old hearts, the greater number for what seemed to the reader a revelation, precious above all, that of spiritual climate, proper to the awakening of the thinker, to his evolution, his progress, his inspiration, his work. That is indeed the principal thing. The mind governs everything. It begins, accomplishes, perseveres, finally achieves. Just as it presides over every increase of knowledge, every creation, it directs the more hidden and more searching effect that of the worker produces on himself throughout his career. I think that I shall not weary the reader if I insist once again on this, which is the whole of the vocation of the thinker or speaker, of the writer and the apostle. It really is the preliminary question. It is further the fundamental question and consistently the secret of success. Do you want to do intellectual work? Begin by creating within you a zone of silence, a habit of recollection, a will to renunciation and detachment which puts you entirely at the disposal of the work. Acquire that state of soul unburdened by desire and self-will, which is the state of grace of the intellectual worker. Without that you will do nothing, at least nothing worthwhile. The intellectual is not self-begotten. He is the son of the idea, of the truth, of the creative word, the life-giver immanent in his creation. When the thinker thinks rightly, he follows God step by step. He does not follow his own vain fancy. When he gropes and struggles in the effort of research, he is Jacob wrestling with the angel and strong against God. It is not natural, given these conditions, that the man of vocation should put away and deliberately forget his everyday man, that he should throw off everything of him, his frivolity, his irresponsibility, his shrinking from work, his material ambitions, his proud or sensual desires, the instability of his will or the disordered impatience of his longings, his over-readiness to please and his antipathies, his acrimonious moods and his acceptance of current standards, the whole complicated entanglement of impediments which block the road of the true and hinder its victorious conquest. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, says Holy Writ. This filial fear is at bottom fear of self. In the intellectual sphere, we might call it attention freed from every inferior preoccupation, and fidelity perpetually alive to the danger of falling away. An intellectual must always be ready to think, that is, to take part of the truth conveyed to him by the universe and prepared for him at such and such a turning point by Providence. The spirit passes and returns not. Happy the man who holds himself ready not to miss, nay, rather to bring about and to utilize the miraculous encounter. Every intellectual work begins by a moment of ecstasy. Only in the second place does the talent of arrangement, the technique of transitions, connection of ideas, construction come into play. Now, what is this ecstasy but a flight upwards, away from self, a forgetting to live our own poor life in order that the object of our delight may live in our thoughts and in our hearts? Memory itself has a share in this gift. There is an interior memory, that of the parrot, and not of the inventor. This memory is an obstruction, closing up the way of thought in favor of words and fixed formulas. But there's another memory, receptive in every direction, and in a state of perpetual discovery. In its content there is nothing ready-made. Its gains are seeds of the future. Its oracles are promises. Now, the kind of memory that we're talking about, too, is ecstatic. It functions in contrast with the springs of inspiration. It does not rest complacently in itself. What it contains is still inspiration under the name of remembrance, and the self in which that memory dwells surrenders, though, to it in the inspiration of vision of truth, quite as much as though through research. What is true of acquisition and pursuit was true of the call at the beginning of our career. After the lingering hesitation of youth, which is so often tormented and perplexed, we had to reach the discovery of ourself, the perception of the secret urge within us, which is directed towards some distant result of which we are not yet clearly conscious. Do you imagine that this is easy? Listening to oneself is a formula that amounts to the same thing as listening to God. It is the creative thought that our true being lies in, our self in its authentic shape. Now, this truth of our eternity, which dominates our present and augurs of our future, is revealed to us only in the silence of the soul, that is, in the exclusion of foolish thoughts, which lead to a puerile and dissipating indulgence in distraction, in the repression of the murmured suggestions that our distorted passions never weary of uttering. Vocation calls for response, which, in one effort to surmount self, hears and consents. It will be the same with the It will be the same with the choice of means to success. Settling one's way of living, one's society, the organization of one's time, the place to be given to contemplation and to action, to general culture and to one's specialty, to work and to recreation, to necessary to necessary concessions and to stern refusals, to the concentration that strengthens the mind and the broader studies that enrich it, to aloofness and to contacts with men of genius, with one's own group, with nature, or with others in general social life, and so forth. These things also can only be wisely judged of in the moment of ecstasy, when we are close to the eternally true, far from the covetous and passionate self. And when we have done our part, results in the measure of them will demand the same virtue of acceptance, the same selflessness, the same peace in a will that is not ours. One achieves what one can, and we need to judge our own capacity so as not on the one hand to underestimate it, or inversely, not to exceed in the direction of pretentiousness and vain conceit. Whence comes this self-judgment, if not from a steady glance at the impersonally true, and from submission to its verdict, even if it cost us an effort or a secret disappointment? Great men seem to us men of great boldness. In reality, they are more obedient than others. The sovereign voice speaks to them. It is because they are actuated by an instinct which is prompting of that sovereign voice that they take, always with courage and sometimes with great humility, the place that posterity will later give them, venturing on acts and risking inventions, often out of harmony with the time and place, and even incurring much sarcasm from their fellows. They are not afraid because, however isolated they may appear to be, they feel that they are not alone. They have on their side the power that finally settles everything. They have a premonition of their empire to come. We, who have no doubt to conceive a very different kind of humility, must yet draw upon the same lofty source. Height is the measure of littleness. The man who has not the sense of true greatness is easily exultant or easily depressed, sometimes both together. It is because the ant does not consider the giant beetle that he looks down on the tiny gnat, and it is because the walker does not feel the wind from the heights that he lingers on the mountain slopes. Always conscious of the immensity of the true and of the slenderness of our resources, we shall not undertake anything beyond our power, but we shall go on to the limit of our power. We shall rejoice then in what has been given us in our measure. It is not a question of mere measuring. The real point of the remark lies in this, that the weak work or pretentious work is always bad work. A life with too ambitious an aim, or one content with too low a level, is a misdirected life. A tree may have indifferent or magnificent branches and flowers. It does not ask for them and cannot command them. Its vegetative soul develops under the action of nature in general and of surrounding influences. Our general nature is the eternal thought. We draw on it with faculties sprung from it, and with the help that it affords us. There must be a correspondence between what we have received from it in the way of gifts, including courage, and what we may expect of it in the way of results. How much could be said of this fundamental disposition as it affects a career entirely devoted to the life of thought? I have spoken of the opposition and lack of understanding that the great are exposed to, but these things are the lot also of the little. How can they be resisted without single-minded attachment to the truth and without complete self-forgetfulness? When the world does not like you, it takes its revenge on you. If it happens to like you, it takes its revenge still by corrupting you. Your only resource is to work far from the world, as indifferent to its judgments as you are ready to serve it. It is perhaps best if it rejects you and thus obliges you to fall back on yourself, to grow interiorly, to watch yourself, to deepen yourself. These benefits are the measure in which we rise above self-interest, that is, in which interest centers on the one thing necessary. Are we perhaps ourselves exposed to the temptations of disparaging, envying, unjustly criticizing others, of disputing with them? We must then remember that such inclinations, which disturb and cause dissension, injure eternal truth and are incompatible with devotion to it. In this connection, we must remark that at a certain level, such disparagement is more apparent than real, and that it has a certain value in forming current opinion. We are often taken in by the way in which the masters speak of one another. They attack one another unmercifully, but they are fully conscious of one another's value, and they attack often unintentionally. Yet it remains true that general progress needs peace and cooperation, and that it is greatly hindered by pettiness of mind. In face of others' superiority, there is only one honorable attitude, that is, to be glad of it, and that it becomes our own joy, our own good fortune. A different sort of good fortune may tempt us, that is, that of external success, though, to tell the truth, that is nowadays very rare in the case of a true intellectual. The public as a whole is vulgar and likes only what is vulgar. Edgar Allan Poe's publishers said that they had to pay him less than others because he wrote better than others. I once knew a painter to whom a picture dealer said, "You need some lessons." What? Yes, to learn not to paint so well. The man whose heart is set on perfection does not understand that sort of language. He does not consent at any price or in any form to cultivate what Molière called the zoocracy. But if his heart begins to fail him, even if we snap our fingers at others' appraisals, are we not exposed within ourselves to the foolish judgments of vanity and instinctive puerility? Never ignore, never refuse to see what may be thought against your own thought, writes Nietzsche. We are not thinking now of incompetent and superficial critics, but of the homage we ourselves owe to vigilance and integrity. How often one would like to evade a difficulty, to be satisfied with an error, unduly to prefer one's own opinion. Severity with oneself, so favorable to rightness of thought, So helpful in safeguarding it against the thousand dangers of research is heroism. How can one plead guilty and be glad of one's condemnation without a boundless love for the truth that gives judgment? That readiness to admit error is offset, it is true, by an uncompromising adherence to our fundamental persuasions, to those intangible intuitions that are at the bottom of our effort and of our very self-criticism. We cannot build on nothing, and the retouches of the workman do not reach down to the first foundations. What we have won by study and considered carefully must be guarded against the unjustified second thoughts and scruples. This is demanded by the love of truth of which we have spoken. It is demanded by the same selflessness which makes us interest ourselves in what is beyond us and yet has taken up its abode in our consciousness. These elevations are a delicate matter, but they're necessary. On no account must the supreme certainties be shaken, on which all the work of the intelligence reposes. We must even be on our guard, again, in the name of devotion to truth, against that better which has been rightly called an enemy of good. It sometimes happens that by widening the field of one's research, one impairs it. And it sometimes happens that by investigating beyond some advisable limit, the mind loses its clearness and ends by being merely perplexed. The star that one looks at too intensely and too long can, by that very fact, give a more and more fitful gleam and end by disappearing from the sky. The conclusion from all this is not that we must not work in depth, nor that we must neglect that broad culture which is a condition of depth in any domain, but that a sure devotion to the true, without personal passion, without loss of balance, is the corrective of excess. There's another line of defense against hastiness in our judgments and in the development of our work. One is not dazzled when one loves the truth by a brilliant idea set in an aureole of commonplaces. That kind of thing does not yield a real result. The most mediocre mind may hit on an idea like a rough diamond or a pearl. What is difficult is cutting the idea, and above all, in setting it into a jewel of truth which will be the real creation. Among the hasty readers of books, says Raymond Fernandez amusingly, I'm inclined to place the author of this book. Yes, but what causes this careless haste which absolves at the outset some less interested and less responsible reader? We shall avoid it by devoting ourselves more earnestly to the true alone. We shall also avoid plunging into some particular theme that we should like to develop without having first explored its general antecedents and its connection with other subjects. To be long, multiple, is the condition for being richly one. Unity at the starting point is a mere void. One feels this when one is devoted to high and mysterious truth. Even if one does not use everything that one has learned, the accumulated knowledge gives a hidden resonance to one's words, and this fullness has for its reward the confidence it inspires. It is a great secret to know how to give radiance to an idea by means of its twilight background. It is a further secret to preserve its power of convergence in despite of this radiating quality. Does failure threaten us, or have we already experienced it? This is the time to take refuge in that immutable, unconditional devotion to truth which inspired our effort. My brain has become my refuge, writes Charles Bonnet, and that is a very much safer refuge. Even at the cost of suffering, creation is a joy, and beyond creation, veneration for the idea whence it comes. Besides, as Foch said, it is with reminders that battles are won. You have failed in something now, which will prepare you to succeed in something else, to succeed, in short, as everyone who is worth anything and who tries is sure to do. I want to point out one last effect of the supreme submission to truth, of which I have sounded the praise. It puts bounds, not only to our personal, but to our human pretensions. Reason cannot do everything. In its last step, according to Pascal, it is to recognize its own limitations. It will only do that if it is submitted to its primal law, which is not its own truth, regarded as its property or its conquest, but to the truth, capital T, that is impersonal and eternal. Here there is no limit to honor, by the very fact that presumption is laid aside. Mystery pays. Faith substituted for research carries the mind into vast spheres that it would never of itself have known, and the light of its own domain gains by the fact that distant stars compel it to turn its eyes to the sky. Reason ambitions only a world. Faith gives it infinity. I do not want to further lengthen this discourse. What it contains will necessarily be repeated, since its purpose is to show where the all, capital A, is to be found. I have pleaded the claims of that all, with its inadequacy, of which I am fully conscious, and for which I crave pardon. I earnestly wish that my suggestions concerning it, weak as they are, may inspire others to praise it better and to serve it more ardently. A.G. Sertillanges, December 1934. Okay. That's the end of the preface of the author. If you wanted to have any remarks, have them. Otherwise, we'll go forward to the forward. And it's okay, by the way. I haven't remarked, I think, on the character of listening to things spoken. Now, first of all, as a matter of fact, you are all probably very bad at reading, just generally speaking. That's just a fact. Most people learn to read in a kind of slipshod, get things done for school kind of way. Or if they're somewhat better, they learn to read for entertainment or utility. And these routes create other vices. But altogether, these methods are usually not sufficiently good for serious reading for a lot of reasons. First of all, reading to pass a test for school is usually superficial and surface reading for short-term memory, and it impresses almost nothing on the soul, and it reorganizes the mind very little at all. And so if you have that habit, if that's what you learned in college or in high school, stop. I just don't learn that way at all anymore. Reading for entertainment is a little better, but reading for entertainment tends to get directed by pleasure and tends to wander around in fantasy, in a unstructured, almost ADHD style of learning. And it's fine for what it is, but you have to learn to rein things in and structure them in your reading. Reading for utility also has similar problems. Reading for utility is going to tend to teach you, it'll teach you to pay attention, and it'll teach you to hold things in mind, and it'll teach you to sort things, for order, reading an electronic manual or something like that. But, or, I don't know, some kind of guide to the Elder Scrolls Morrowind so you can complete a quest. But again, it's still superficial. It helps with connection, but it doesn't help you to question it. It doesn't help you to form your mind. What you need to be doing when you're reading is you need to be, first of all, you need to get second habit of following the thing, and then you need to be sticking what you're learning in your mind in a sort of definite way. Sometimes I repeat what the author says as he says it in sort of summative propositions, and I sort of stick them out there. So as I was going through, for instance, Let's see. Where was it that one stuck out to me? For instance, once he said, we must not even be on our guard. Sorry, excuse me. We must even be on our guard again in the name of devotion to truth against that better which has been so rightly called an enemy of the good. It's the perfect. Um, in English, the expression is the perfect, which has been so rightly called the enemy of the good. Although I like the better, which is the enemy of the good, because it has a sort of progressive feel to it. But it sometimes happens that by widening the field of one's research, one impairs it. And it sometimes happens that by investigating beyond some advisable limit, the mind loses its clearness and ends by being merely perplexed. The star that one looks at too intensely and too long can, by that very fact, give a more fitful gleam and by the end disappear from the sky. Okay. So he's talking here about um, hyper focus or hyper specialization, but also dilettantism and overbroad study. There's a balance, is what he's trying to say. So a man can become so specialized and so hyper fixated on one topic and one subject that he just totally loses any ability to profit from it, is what he's saying. And he can also become so broad that he can't even see any subject for what it's worth. This is less common for so-called smarter intellectual people today, although there's a genre, for this, the genre of sort of wide knowing. But in any case, I just sort of, what I just gave you was a kind of summary of what he said. Well, first of all, you kind of want to spontaneously be creating little summaries as you listen or as you read. And as you get better at this, I just gave you the slow version, which is where I stopped and I spoke it out and I gave it to you as an account. But that's not internally how you work. Internally, you can, this is also an analogy, but internally, it's as if you have an image of the summary. It's as if you look at the thing under the aspect of a painting or image you've made of it, which is summative of it. It would take a long time to talk about this objectively, but I suppose I could say I get a sense of what a paragraph means. I get an idea, an impression, an immediate image or an immediate feeling about it. And I make an intentional choice to retain that image and to present it in front of myself and look at it for a moment, so that it's purposefully put in front of me and gains my attention. And then I in a certain way, and this is all automatic or semi-automatic, but what is important is you're making intentional internal actions. When you're looking at this impression, you sort of put it to the side and you attempt to retain it, and then you move on in the text. And you keep doing that as you go. And as you go, these intentional impressions of what you're reading, you put them to the side and you relate them one to another as you go. So it's like, oh, he was talking about this before, and now it's to this, and so these, I see how these go together. And that's a long discursive way to say what's going on, but it's just sort of at a glance you see these things. And you may say something internally with your monologue to yourself, but this is really just a representation of the process to yourself. And when you're doing this, as you get more advanced, you should be relating this to other times you've done it and to other books and to other things you know. It may start with something as simple as just applying it to something you're working on right now, but this is very important. It's not simply enough to go, okay, don't get too broad, don't get too narrow, you'll lose focus on the truth, or you'll never grasp the truth, and that's it. You don't have that as a little impression. No, you need to relate that to, immediately something like, Oh, I see. When I was doing research as a freshman on that topic, I was focused too narrow, and that's why I never got it. Oh, or yeah, that's right. I was going too broad on that, and I didn't really try take the time to stop and really learn something. I see. I mean, and again, these are just going to be relations of impressions at a glance. They're not going to be. You're not going to actually be doing in your head this long, oh yeah, blah 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 thing I'm doing with you right now. You're just going to relate the thought to the thought. Now, at the beginning, you might have to do it in a slow way like that if you're not practiced at this, but eventually you'll be able to jump from the summary of the thing to the situation. And sometimes if you get and this is just one way to do it. And sometimes you get very advanced, you can just jump to the situation as the way of summarizing the thing, and then maybe uh, but from the situation it'll help you give a general impression of the thing. This is just it just changes as you habituate. But all of this is to say you need to be doing active intellectual work when you read. And the same thing, and it doesn't matter if you're reading it in the page or if you're listening to me. Um, if you're reading it in the page, this is what marginalia is for. Marginalia, when you're reading on the page, just lets you do this. You get this impression, you get this sense of what a section means, and just on the marginalia, you write a few words to try to sum up that impression, and to so that you can evoke it later, or so that you sort of make it concrete on the page, which helps it put in memory. With words, when you're listening to somebody, you have to do it more in the mind. So usually you need an imaginative image, or at least a sentence, or say something to yourself, or make a vivid impression intentionally, internally. But these are skills you have to be working on. And if you have problems retaining or learning from books, it's probably because you're not doing that, and you're not habituated to it. Um, but you need to be doing that when you're listening to me or when you're reading. Let me see if anybody's been saying anything. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Somebody says Jordan Peterson recommends not taking notes during a talk in order to internalize the material. Take notes later. Yeah, that's the issue. So don't, and then, and this is a little complicated because Mortimer Adler has a wonderful book called How to Read a Book. And I would read that, but it's not very good read out loud material, and it's tedious. But go get it. Go look it up. Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book. Um, he also has How to Speak, How to Listen, which is very important. But either way. Um, so there's a place for notes. So first of all, actually reading and digesting a book is a complex process. But it would be the same thing for a lecture or a dialogue with somebody. But certainly your initial engagement with a real lecture, and now keep in mind this has to be a real lecture with somebody who's competent, is really working and trying to deliver something to you. An engagement with a real speaker, really trying to listen to him, is on the first level, shut up, put the pen down, and listen to the guy, and really try to be intentional about it. Don't, like, the problem is with notes is that what people are doing, and they get habituated into this for a lot of different reasons. What people are doing when they take notes is they're sitting there and they're sort of stupidly, like a court stenographer, like recording it in like summative little things, or in important bits of information that they think they need for later, so they can go over it later and put it in superficial memory so that they can regurgitate it on a test. This is stupid and worthless for a real lecture. Now, if you've got a guy, now the problem is that some educators know this is what happens, and so what they produce as their lecture material is just they just basically lecture from the equivalent of these notes so that others can produce from them notes. And it goes in an endless stupid cycle. But if you have somebody who's a real lecturer and is really trying to convey a subject and straining to get it out, that's not how you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be a court stenographer recording it. First of all, if you need a record, get a tape recorder and record the guy, and you can go over that later. Don't with the stupid notes. Get the tape recorder up, put the phone down and record him, and then look at the guy, or look off in the distance and listen to the guy, and try to hear it. That's step one. And whatever you need to do, if you've got, I have a little bit of ADD, so I don't need to look at the guy. I need to distract myself by watching something or by moving something or by looking at something that's not important. But then I can listen to the guy. But whatever you need to do to actually first pay attention to him by the own effort of your will, do that first, and then hear it. But then, when you begin to hear him, you'll do what I was talking about before, which is true note taking. That is to say, note in the sense of nota, as in the sense of a point, as in the sense of as like in a musical score, you note, you mark, you have these points. And so when you're listening to a man and you're truly listening to him, if he has some coherence that you can follow, you can mark out in your own structuring, in your own listening to him, you can mark out what's important in a mental way and sort of and hold it in memory in an active way and go, he's talking about this. And then he's saying this, and then he's saying this, and that came after that. Okay. And then retain it. And by the way, we do this naturally whenever we're talking to somebody that's important. If you get in I pick a horrifying situation, okay, where it's important. If your boss calls you into the office for a disciplinary talk where he's asking you about an incident he wants to know so he can know what he's going to do with you, and he starts asking you questions and he starts saying, well, somebody said blah and blah and blah. Well, you listen. You didn't take notes like an idiot. You listen, and he says blah, and he says blah 2, and he says blah 3, and he says blah 4, and he says blah 5, and you go 1, 2. You say, oh, he said this and this and this and this and that, and that person, and this is about this person saying this, and this is about this other person saying this, and this about this other person saying this, and this about how I acted in that meeting. And I better remember all those so that I can have a response, so that I can explain myself. And you remember it all, and you block it into bits. And then if you have any kind of intelligence, you begin to think about how you're going to respond to each of those bits. You don't sit there and let it pass over you unless you're an idiot, and you don't just take it as a muddle. You structure it correctly, and then you begin to formulate responses. If you're listening, if you're not, some people don't listen, and then they formulate responses from the first word the guy says, and then they say something stupid. That happens all the time too. But if you're really doing it and you're really trying to defend yourself in a stressful situation, you suddenly become the best listener in the world. But that's an automatic response, and that creates the kind of listening and note taking that you really have to do. Well, that's something you need to be doing all the time, not just when it's dangerous. If you really want to intellectually profit from reading, or if you really want to intellectually profit from listening to somebody, either somebody reading or somebody giving a lecture, you have to realize that this is an important moment, and what this person is saying or what this book is saying is important, and I need to pay attention. And you have to feel that. You have to turn your will and your heart to that. And getting there is a little difficult. So I'm not saying that's not just a light switch. As a man grows intellectually, as a man grows his intellectual life, if he does things intentionally, he'll be able to find a way to turn his will to these things. The best thing to do is to start with things you're interested in and work on those, and then broaden out from those to other things that you can connect to the interested things. And as you do that, you'll build up connections of interest, and then you sort of will like eventually you'll get a repertoire of things so connected to everything that you're interested in that everything starts to become interesting because you can relate it to what you're interested in. And that actually doesn't take too long if you're intentional about it. And then things become important. Like, 10 or 15 years ago, I would have never read a book like this. But now I realize, oh, you need stuff like this so that you can actually process philosophy and you can actually learn theology in a way that's effective to change so that you can better write, so that you can better understand more philosophy, and so that you can, change your spiritual life and become close to Christ. Um, you know, once you realize the connections between interests, then anything becomes interesting. You might also just have a good temperament and you can make anything interesting, but that's the point. Whatever is required, to bring the will to the point of interest in the thing, do that, and then be interested in the thing. And then once you're interested in the thing, begin to break it down into pieces so that you actually listen. And it's a big deal. And you need to be doing that. And if you have any other habit from school, even if it got you through, throw it out, start over. Just be done with it. And I don't care if you're in school right now. I mean, I know you need to get the grade, but I mean, if you're in school right now, this is the best opportunity. Throw all that crap out, start over, and I'm not going to tell you to get worse grades, but like if you need to get a B for a few semesters, I mean, in my opinion, for your spiritual life, not for your grades. If you need to get a B for a few semesters so that you can actually learn rather than superficially memorizing and regurgitating so that you get an A on the test, get the B. Spiritually, now ideally you do both things and then you learn how to really learn, and then you don't have to do the stupid thing anymore. But learn how to learn first. Learn how to learn now, today, this moment. Otherwise, the reason people think school is stupid is because they don't learn and they don't know how to learn. And it doesn't help that teachers don't teach them how to learn, but on the other hand, it's not just a method. It's not a further set of notes you can take. It's really about moving the heart to the truth. It's really about moving the heart to the subject matter, whatever it is, and taking true interest in it. And if you can't do that, it doesn't matter how great a teacher I am. If you won't move your heart, you're not going to get it. You're not going to have it. It doesn't even matter if you're very smart. You can have a galaxy brain IQ, but if the heart doesn't move, the thing won't be had. And a lot of that's on your side. And even if I'm an inspirational teacher, or if you have an inspirational teacher, they're only inspirational in a kind of automatic way on some things. An inspirational teacher really only teaches somebody the beginnings of what it's like to actually be interested in something. But you need to generalize that if you're going to have a real intellectual life. And if you're going to generalize it, that's going to come from you. You have to take responsibility. Now, of course, through the grace of God. You also need to be praying to God, which is what we're going to do every day. You need to be praying for God to move the will in this way, and to have the abilities to move the will in this way, and for all of the working faculties to do these things. So in grace will it be possible for you to strive to move the will to true interest, so that you'll expand your intellectual life, and so that you'll be able to enrich your spiritual life, so that you'll be in true intimacy with God. But in any case, it has to come from a movement of the heart. There's no way to do it otherwise. Let's see. What else have we had? Okay. Peterson. Notes. Oh. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's finish up our selection from the book today. It is only 2 pages now, so we'll be done real quick. Okay. No, I don't have any lasagna right now. I'll say lasagna. I'll say lasagna all you want. I'm no fun. Although I'm no fun with the memes. It's not like you manipulated me, and I just participate with them, which kind of kills the meme, to be frank. Okay. This is the forward. It's 2 pages. Then we'll be done today because I did a lot of prefatory and schematic stuff. Forward. Among the works of St. Thomas, there is a letter to a certain brother John, in which are enumerated 16 precepts for acquiring the treasure of knowledge. This letter, whether it be authentic or not, must be looked at in itself. It is priceless. We should like to imprint its every word on the inmost being of the Christian thinker. We published it together with the prayers of the same teacher, in which his religious thought is condensed and has his soul revealed. We conceived the idea of commenting on the 16 precepts in order to link up with them things of which it is perhaps useful to remind men of study in our day. In practice, that method seemed rather restrictive. We have chosen to adopt a freer procedure, but the substance of it, of this little volume, is none the less entirely Thomistic. It will be found to contain what the Master suggests in the 16 precepts and elsewhere concerning the management of the mind. This little work has no pretension to replace Les Sources. In part, it is inspired by that book. The author, doubtless, like many another, has not forgotten the stirring he experienced at 20 when Pierre Gautret stimulated in him the ardent desire of knowledge. Let us often remind this age, which sorely needs light, of the conditions that enable us to get light and to prepare its diffusion by our work. We shall not speak here of intellectual production in itself. That would be the subject matter of another volume, but it is one and the same mind that first seeks to enrich itself and then goes on to expand itself wisely. Since we shall have to say later that to give out is, in this case, one of the means of adding to our store, we cannot doubt the identity of the principles which, in one process as in another, make our intellectual activity fruitful. For that reason, we may hope to be useful to all. Chandelin, August 15th, 1920. What is that letter? Let me look that up. I didn't know that I didn't know about this document. What does he call it? Uh-oh, you might have to read more. The Aquinas. Aquinas. Letter. Brother John. 16. Precepts. For acquiring the treasure of knowledge. This is a thing. I didn't know this was a thing. Oh, yeah, this is a real thing. Okay. Put it in the chat. Is this it? This is very short. Okay. Yeah, I could do this in Latin and English if we wanted. Hold on. Okay, yes, it's very short. I see it. Okay, wonderful. Okay. I'll go ahead and put this in the chat. I didn't know this was a thing. Okay, this is the text he's mentioning. St. Thomas Aquinas, 16 precepts for acquiring knowledge. De modo studendi. Because it was asked of me, John, my beloved in Christ, how you ought to study in the acquiring of a treasury of knowledge, such counsel is delivered to you by me thus. In Latin, that's quia quisistiame in Christo mihi charisme iones, qualiter te studere appareat in tesoro scientia acquirindo, taleame tibi traditur consilium. 1. That by rivulets, and not immediately into the sea, we choose to enter, because by the easier we may come at the more difficult. This is my warning then, and your instruction. Ut per rivulos non statim in mare, eligas introri, quia per ficilora ad difficiliora apparet divenire, hec est ergo monitio mea et instructio tua. 2. I bid you to be slow to speak. Tardi loquum te esse iubeo. 3. And slow in coming to the place of talking. Et tarde ad locutorium accindendum. 4. Embrace purity of conscience. Conscientiae puritatem amplicetere. 5. Do not cease to pray. Oratione vecare non desinas. 6. Love to keep your cell on a regular basis if you wish to be admitted to the wine cellar. Celum frequenta diligas sifis in celum viniarum introduci. 7. Show yourself amiable to all. Omnibus te amabilium exhibe. 8. Pay no heed to others' affairs. Nihil quere penitus de factis aliorum. 9. Do not be overly familiar with anyone, because excessive familiarity breeds contempt and yields subtraction from the ability to study. Neminiti multum familiarum ostendas, qui mea familiaritas parit contemptum, et subtractiones a studio materiam subministrant. 10. In no way enter into the sayings and doings of secular of secular persons. De verbis et factis secularium Nola tenus te introimitas. 11. Above all, flee conversation. Do not omit to imitate the footsteps of the saints and the good. Discursus super omnia fugias, sanctorum et bonorum in imitare vestigia non omitas. 2. Do not consider from whom you learn. Non respicias aquo audias. 13. But commit to memory whatever is good that is said. Sed quidquid boni dicator memorae recommenda. 14. It is the same with what you read and hear. Work so that you may understand. Resolve each of your doubts. Ei que legis et audis fact intelligas de dubiis te certifica. And busy yourself to store whatever you are able in the closet of your mind, as desiring to fill a vessel. Et quid poteris in amarilo in amariolo mentis reponere statege sicut cupiens vas implere. 16. Do not seek what is too high for you. Ulteriora te ne que isiris. Following these footsteps, you will put forth and bear branches and fruit in the vineyard of the Lord of hosts as long as you have life. If you pursue this, you will be able to obtain that which you desire. Illa sequens vestigia, fundis et fructus in vinia domini sabaoth utiles. Quandiu vitam abueris, proferes et produces, ec si sectatus fueris, ad id attingere poteris quod effectas. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Presumably the author will structure the book around this, although he says he'll do it loosely. But I hadn't read that text before. I've seen these things produced, but I hadn't seen the original so-called text, whether it's authentic to Thomas or not. But I suppose it's good when you have things like this when they're working off basically what's a commentary. If you have the original sort of something like this, you basically have a kind of index or source. So I would use that. Keep that in mind. Let's see. I'm doing my best at ecclesiastical Latin, but when I have a word I don't know, I kind of slip out. So, I mean, the sense I don't know it in the sense of am not used to saying it. Do you plan on doing? Andy Kathman asks, do you plan on doing any streams on Garrigou Lagrange's Three Ages of the Interior Life? So, if you weren't here at the beginning, I'm going to do daily work on spiritual theology, and I don't know if I'll do because Three Ages is so long. At my parish, we've only just now finished the first of the 2 volumes, and I mean, we work on it for about 45 minutes a day, and that took about 2 months. Now, we could get a little quicker, but it takes a long time. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I'll need to talk about it, and sort of we'll see. But I certainly not right now. If we were going to do that, that would be later. Like, it would be after we had acquired some more simpler work and more groundwork. At the parish, I just decided, well, let's just throw everybody in the deep end and make them do it. because I wanted to go ahead and get as much spiritual theology as I could, because I did not feel what we had in our formation was good enough. I did not feel that we were adequately grounded in spiritual theology sufficiently to be catechizing people. Uh, it just wasn't there. I mean, you know, if there's any practical skill the church can claim to have special expertise to teach, it's the spiritual life. And then no priests, ministers, deacons, or lay faithful or catechists know how to teach this or even its principles. That's backwards. So I wanted to go ahead and put that in practice so that we could use it for RCIA and catechesis, and to help Father, to deepen Father's ability to talk to people, and he's been using it. But to be able to transmit that on here to a general audience with no formation and without Father there to help, that's a little more difficult. So I would probably go the simple to complex route, and so 3 ages would be late. I'll certainly mention it when I do things like this, where I stop and talk about what I'm doing, which is my usual method of approach when I read. Let's see. Ailey Rivera asked, what are my credentials? I don't have a PhD. I did study for I talked about this earlier, but I did study for professorship in philosophy, but I stopped at graduate level because it was not good. I mean, if you want to go back through my biography at the beginning, I just, it's awful. And it actively would have been bad for me. Plus, I mean, the money was terrible. I was already making more money than my professor mentors at what, 22 years old. And you know, my mentor's 40 something years old. I'm not doing that. That's okay. And then get treated badly, especially now with my views, faithful, and you know, certainly not very left wing inclined in a secular academy. Good luck. I could maybe I could maybe today work at some Catholic universities, um, or it's maybe a religious college somewhere, not Catholic. There's no chance that I would enjoy at any moment, even a top 10 secular university. I would be miserable and angry. And it's not even so much. I don't mind. I could have 100 sort of vague secular people in my audience right now and talk to all of you, you know, for 10 hours and enjoy myself. It's not that. It's that if you actually have an evangelical spirit, and you actually have if you have either an evangelical spirit or an actual broad intellectual spirit, the world of academia actively attempts to hurt you and fight you, and bring you down. That's just not really what even top 10 university positions are about. Unless you happen, unless you happen to be a genius who happens to have been put in a position at one of the top schools um, on a subject that the elite intelligentsia really want you to talk about. And then, you know, you'll be given the golden road, like, oh, all of a sudden I can't remember, like Quine or something, although Quine was an angry SOB. Like John Rawls. John Rawls, political philosopher, just had the carpet rolled out for him because he was the first person to articulate something theoretically like that would later become sort of the Clintonian, Blairian, sort of post Thatcher, post Reagan liberal consensus. sometimes called the neoliberal consensus. He was the first theoretician of that in the academy, and it was very interesting to the elite intelligentsia, and they just roll the carpet right out for you, and you can do all the research you want as long as you keep everybody happy. But that is not even one man out of 100. And it's just not possible to have an intellectual calling and be fulfilled in any part of the academy today. It's very sad. Let's see. Somebody says, at least don't get stuck in academia unless you really love. Who loves it though? Well, where? Like, I mean, maybe in some. Like, I know professors and stuff that do that are like at liberal arts, in some liberal arts context. But like even then, who loves that? I never. Who loves it? Like the best I've seen is like the best situation you can be in is like you're at a research university and you're doing something obscure, and the endowment of the university or whatever, or the chairs, or the installed chairs or whatever, pay for your research, and you can basically do whatever you want, and it's so obscure that nobody can bother you or get in your way. But like, that's not really that great. Like, you might have some colleagues in your department that you can be friends with in an intellectually helpful way sometimes, and that's good. And then, if you're at a really good university, you might have, good students, good graduates, especially if you have a graduate department. But, in some of these fields, good luck. And then maybe, there might be there's some fulfillment in teaching grad students. But good Lord, if you're just getting undergrad students, even if, you've got a very cushy situation, it's awful. That's awful. I would rather work as a day laborer than have to teach at some mid-level research university where everybody who comes to my class, even at 300 and 400 level courses, hates what I'm teaching them and doesn't really want to do it. And my colleagues don't know what I'm talking about and don't care. And we all sort of trundle through on our endowment money that we're all getting for, I don't know, because the department chair thought it would be good to hire us. It's terrible. Don't do it. Let's see. Oh, Vermeule's fascinating, as somebody asked about Vermeule. I tried to get Vermeule to come on Reason and Theology. We're friends on Twitter, but he won't respond. But he's a fun guy. I don't know how, but I mean, like, even Vermeule, like, he clearly doesn't. I think he's at Harvard, right? I forget. It's Harvard. One of the top. Who cares? They're all the same big Sodom and Gomorrah amalgamation, and he has somehow gotten himself in that position. And he's clearly, in a certain way, out on a limb by himself, and he gets a certain kind of respect. But it's got to be god awful to be at Harvard and be him or whatever it is. It's all the same. Somebody says present day academia is communist crap. I wish it was communist crap, because that would be interesting. It's not even communist crap. It's LARPing as communist crap, because they're not really revolutionaries. They don't actually revolutionize anything. It's just a dress rehearsal in the mind of a revolution. So you don't understand. So the way that cultural leftism has, actual communism failed, and actual revolution failed so badly in the West that it made an inner turn into psychology, And so right now, the left is reduced to revolutionizing mind pictures every 10 to 30 years, while all basically material situations and circumstances stay basically the same. And this is stupid and not a fun game. And it's like it's a massive game of psychotherapy that they play with themselves and other people and that they can't get out of. And sort of when you can get outside of it and sort of get a solid grounding in the spiritual life, it's hard to get out of it when you become interested in it. But once you get out of it and you look at it from the point of view of a spiritual life, you can come to pity them in the love of God because they're sort of really just working themselves out on top of other people, and it's very sad and it's a lot of pain, and they don't really even know what they're doing. Um, Pray for them. Let's see. Oh, Chris said, "Oh, hey, my friend Chris is here." In philosophy departments, it's not even that they're communists. They start off by denying the truth, so there's nowhere to go except classifying language that other people use. Well, yeah, intellectually they have a problem, but like really, so if you go into the origins of, sometimes it's called cultural Marxism, but the Frankfurt School is so loosely associated with. Basically, what happened on the left was a turn into psychotherapy by way of Freud, and then that's just gotten worse and worse. And so, what the left doesn't care about the truth except for instrumental purposes, and then the rest of the time, the public leftist intellectual is just doing psychotherapy in public to other people. He's working out his sexual preoccupations and tensions and anxieties. He's working out his interpersonal anxieties. He's working out his problems with his friends and family. He's working out fake traumas, sometimes real traumas. Sometimes he's seeking to make traumas so that he can have something to work out. He's doing all this not with his therapist, but in public with everyone, whether or not they want to do it or not. And he calls this revolution in progress because he's an idiot. That's what really the cultural left is about. And it's why I couldn't maintain myself in it, because I thought, well, look, if we're going to do progress, are we going to do anything? Are we going to make people's lives better? Are we going to change anything? Oh, no, we're just going to pretend we're doing psychotherapy with them, but we make them miserable and we make ourselves miserable. That's okay. I got to go. Nice talking to you, fellas. Let's see. Let's see. People get mad about restrooms at bars. Yeah, but that's, just the latest attempt to fix something. The thing is, the stuff that makes you mad, that's just epiphenomena to the real disturbance underneath, which is a lack of any connection to anything and a lack of any hope to health for these people. And getting you angry. This is why detachment is important, so very important. Getting you angry is just a further way to get you involved in their therapy, in their fake therapy. It's if they can actualize something in the world, they've made a change, even if it's just actualizing you being angry. They love that. Don't give it to them. Don't give it to yourself either, because it's bad for you. Let it pass. It doesn't do anything if it passes. The point of letting it pass is that it makes it not be, because what they need is a reaction. What they need is the attention. You're feeding it. Stop getting upset. Yeah, every hard. Kyle says what I found interesting that Che Guevara was against illegal immigration, and he was a hard leftist. Yeah, every hard leftist should be against illegal immigration. I mean, you're trying to improve the material conditions of people, and illegal immigration is an influx of labor, is an influx of insecurity, is an influx of a lot of things that can affect the material conditions of people. You at least need to be prudent about it. Obviously, duh. And this idea that somehow you could just ignore it and things will be okay and it's no problem and it doesn't do anything is not even leftist. It's just it's it's sacrificing actual material betterment of people, which was supposed to be the point of being on the left, for attempting to actualize a fantasy about the psychological betterment of everyone in principle, when in fact you don't even create that. Like, it's not as if the people immigrating illegally are made that much psychologically better off, and it's not as if the whole country is made better off by you ignoring the problem. I mean, it's kind of just a matter of when they get tired of it and there's enough of you, the subject can change, is what's been happening. Missing the mark. My friend Chris says part of the key to understanding leftists is that pain is preferable to boredom. They have the capacity to think, but given their premises, they have nothing to think about. Yeah, I mean, really, yeah, the fascinating thing, so what I call left wing therapy, therapy in public, is that they don't, some, but most of these people don't have real traumas, and they don't have, real things to be working out. What they have is boredom. And they are justifying slaking their boredom by way of using psychological tools that we've developed to manipulate anger and upset other people for no end, really. They think that that passing entertainment is progress, or they dress up passing entertainment as progress. And it doesn't. There's no standard of progress that they achieve when they do this. Okay. Well, let's see. How long have we gone today? I bet 6 hours. Oh, no, I haven't even hit 3. Okay. If we don't have anything else to talk about, if we don't have any other discussion we want to have, I'm going to call today a day. We've read some. We talked about method and procedure. We talked about where we're going to go. Tomorrow we'll continue with this book. And then by the end of the week, we should finish with this, and we should be able to do a couple of other propedeutic texts, to introduce the various bits and pieces of what we're going to be working on. I've got the Lectio Divina book, which is, I think, shorter than this one by a little bit, and probably the introduction to the Catechism. And then once those are out of the way, we'll just start introducing the structure of how we do this every day. And this will probably take us about a week and a half. I'd say a week and a half, 2 weeks to get into the daily actual grind of the actual formula I want to do. If I can do this every day. I might not do it every day. It might be 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, just whatever I can do. But we should be able to get it done. And I think if you follow this on a regular basis, you'll start to see how it goes and how it works and the ways in which it's good for you. But this is a long slog kind of thing. It's not a sort of quick off thing. Although I'll try to make, again, some short videos so that people can have something to watch quickly. Let's see. Oh, what do I think about where Peter is going from ultramontanists to progressive dissidents over the gender issues? I haven't followed this controversy. I've talked with what's his name, that general editor of Where Peter Is, a few times. He does seem fairly loyal to the Roman magisterial productions, and he does not usually give interpretations of them that I would consider perfidious. So I don't have necessarily a negative opinion about the man. But I don't know the contents of that controversy. And again, you'll find, well, of course, I don't support sin. I don't like to hang my hat on the things that people spend their time sort of performatively signaling about. I don't think it's good for you, usually. Um, you know, you evaluate a thing for what it is and what you can do about it, and that's the end of it. Um, if there's gender ideology problems, if there's sexual debauchery problems, do I have them in my life personally? Yes or no? If I don't have them in my life personally, so then what's their relationship to me? If it's sort of kind of an ideological thing that's in the air all the time, well, there's always some ideological thing or another. So what's the point of me getting involved in it? I mean, there's, to a certain extent, the whole point of pushing an ideological thing is to get me involved in it and to get me upset and worked up, and there's no point to that. It's contrary to my salvation. It's contrary to the functioning of my spiritual life. And I think many Catholics get overly obsessed with culture war battles that have no territory to win. There's nothing to be gained and quite a lot spiritually to lose to even play the game. And it doesn't protect the church to fight that battle either. Okay. Um, it looks like we're all good today. I think you got a feel for how I go about things. We'll continue to work on the book tomorrow. Let me think. Yeah, didn't seem to be any more questions. So we'll just go ahead and close in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, pray for us. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.